Elias Rowan sat by the cafe window as the morning rain traced silver threads down the glass, each streak catching the pale light like a quiet reminder of the hours he had spent pretending his life was full. The city outside moved at its usual rhythm, blurred figures crossing streets and splashing through puddles, none of them noticing the man who had everything except a reason to feel warmth. Even inside the cafe, surrounded by murmurs and the clatter of cups, Elias felt a distance he could not name. His untouched black coffee cooled beside him, releasing faint steam that dissolved before reaching his face. He stared at it, as if trying to remember the last time something simple had tasted comforting. His phone buzzed with reminders he no longer cared about. He turned it face down, almost ashamed of how easily he had let the world mold him into someone efficient but hollow. Outside the window, a small shape moved into his line of sight, hesitating before stepping closer. At first he thought it was a child simply watching the rain, but then her tiny hand pressed against the glass, leaving an oval of fog edged with trembling fingers. Elias lifted his eyes fully for the first time that morning. A little girl, no more than 3, stood alone in the drizzle. Her shoes were soaked, her sweater too thin, her hair tied in loops that had fallen loose. Yet her eyes, wide and curious, carried something deeper than confusion. They carried a plea she did not know how to name. When she saw him looking, she tilted her head, studying him with quiet hope. Then her lips parted, and through the muffled barrier of the window he saw the words form before he heard them, faint but steady. "Are you lost too, mister?" The question pierced him with clarity. He pushed his chair back and hurried outside, the rain cold but almost welcome on his skin. When he reached her, she stepped back only enough to show caution, not fear. He crouched to meet her height, noticing how her small shoulders trembled beneath her damp sweater. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, clutching the edge of her sleeve. "Lila." "Where's your family, Lila?" Her gaze drifted toward the street, not toward any home but toward uncertainty itself. "Mama's sick. I was looking for help." Her voice thinned. "I got lost." He swallowed, sensing the fragility in her words. "How long have you been out here?" Many sleeps." She held up 3 fingers. 3. Elias felt something inside him shift, as though a sealed door had cracked open. He lifted his coat from his shoulders and wrapped it around her tiny frame. She didn't resist. She leaned in slightly, seeking warmth the way flowers seek sun. The rain softened as if the world were pausing to listen. "Come inside," he murmured. "You shouldn't be alone." In the cafe, the staff exchanged startled glances but said nothing. Elias guided Lila to a chair, sitting beside her as she studied the menu like it was written in a foreign language. He ordered warm milk and a plate of toast. When it arrived, she reached for the cup with shaking hands, and he steadied it for her until she managed her first sip. Steam fogged her lashes. Relief softened her tight shoulders. As she ate, Elias noticed marks on her sleeves, places where fabric had stretched thin and dirt had settled. Not neglect from indifference, he sensed, but from survival. This child had traveled through fear with nothing but hope to hold. "Where is your mother now?" he asked softly. "In a small room," she whispered. "She couldn't walk anymore. I went to find someone to help, but I forgot the way back." Elias exhaled, the weight of her words folding into him like a quiet storm. He looked around the cafe, the warm lights, the safe walls, and wondered how many times he had sat here blind to the suffering only a few steps away. He reached for his phone, not to answer the world that demanded from him, but to call someone who could help find the clinic Lila described. As he made arrangements, the little girl leaned her head against the chair's back, exhaustion finally catching her. Her eyes fluttered. "You won't leave me, right?" she murmured. "No," Elias said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I'm here." She smiled faintly, a tired, trusting curl of her lips. It struck him with unexpected force. How easily a child could give faith where adults spent years withholding it. The rain outside began to lighten, the gray day softening into a clearer tone. The world felt different, not because it had changed, but because for the first time in a long while, Elias's heart had. As arrangements were confirmed, he looked at Lila, wrapped in his coat, eyes drifting closed. Something in her presence steadied him in a way he hadn't felt since youth, in a time when he believed care was something two people could build, rather than something he feared losing. He paid the bill, lifted Lila gently into his arms, and stepped toward the door. The cafe window reflected them. A man who had mastered everything except connection, and a child who didn't know she had just altered the direction of his life. As he stepped outside, Lila stirred and whispered, "Mama needs me." Her voice trembled with longing, and Elias felt his breath catch. He hesitated, realizing how quickly responsibility had grown into something tender, something that tugged at memories he had buried beneath work and distance. The street around him seemed quieter, as though the city itself were waiting to see what choice he would make next, what old truth might rise to meet him quietly now. Elias carried Lila through the thinning rain, her small hands clutching his shirt as though he were the only steady thing left in her collapsing world. His car sat a short walk away, glossy and immaculate, utterly mismatched to the fragile child settling against his shoulder. When he opened the door, the warm air flowed out, brushing her cheeks with relief she didn't bother to hide. She curled into the passenger seat, oversized coat swallowing her whole, eyes heavy but alert to his every movement. He fastened her seat belt gently, his fingers brushing her trembling arms, and the small contact felt like a vow forming quietly between them. He pulled out of the parking lot with deliberate calm, though inside his chest something fluttered with an urgency he hadn't known he could feel anymore. The city rolled past in streaks of muted color, wet pavement reflecting headlights like scattered fragments of forgotten tenderness. Lila watched everything, the buildings, the people, the sky, her gaze filled with the kind of wonder born from surviving fear, not innocence. She spoke softly, almost as if she were scared to disturb the fragile safety forming in the car. "Mama said light helps us find home," she murmured, tracing a line in the fog on her window. "Even when it's dark." Elias glanced at her, struck by how her voice carried both wisdom and fragility. "She sounds very brave," he said. "She is," Lila replied, nodding with a conviction too heavy for 3-year-old shoulders. "But she was hurting, and I didn't know how to make it stop." Elias tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The world had given him wealth, influence, and status, but none of that mattered in the presence of a child asking for the simplest, purest thing: someone to help her mother. He called his assistant, gave faint descriptions of the clinic Lila remembered, and requested anything: records, shelter lists, street cameras, that might help locate it. Yet even with resources activated, he understood this search wasn't born from power. It was born from something gentler, something he had once felt long ago and thought he had lost. As the rain faded into mist, they stopped at a small bakery to get food. Lila's eyes widened at the sight of warm bread, and Elias bought 2 rolls, tearing one into tiny pieces she could hold without dropping. She ate as though reminded of comfort she hadn't expected to feel again. Crumbs dusted her chin, and when she laughed softly at the way one fell onto her sleeve, Elias felt warmth bloom beneath his ribs, an unfamiliar but welcome ache. Back in the car, she pointed out places she had passed in her wandering. A fountain where she slept under a ledge, a corner store where someone gave her half a sandwich, a church where she had hoped someone would take her to her mother. Each quiet revelation struck deeper, each sentence reshaping his understanding of the world he thought he knew. Her courage was astonishing, her loneliness unbearable. The search stretched across several hours, weaving through narrow streets and quiet neighborhoods, until at last a message came: a likely match. A small shelter-run clinic near the river, underfunded, overcrowded, but compassionate. Lila perked up at the description, nodding rapidly as tears filled her eyes. "Mama, that's Mama's place." The final drive was silent except for Lila's breathing, soft and rhythmic, like she was preparing for something both hopeful and frightening. When they arrived, the building stood dim under a flickering street lamp, its chipped walls bearing the weight of too many untold stories. Lila's hand slipped into Elias's automatically, her fingers cold but trusting. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and damp blankets. A volunteer nurse approached, expression wary until she recognized Lila. "We've been looking everywhere for her," she whispered, relief shaking her words. Then she hesitated, glancing at Elias, impressive, unfamiliar, out of place. "She kept asking for help for her mother, but we didn't know where she went." Lila tugged Elias forward before explanations could continue. She led him down a narrow hallway to a small room illuminated by a single low lamp. A woman lay on the cot, breathing shallowly, her skin pale against the faded blanket. Even from a distance, Elias felt something in him fracture. There was a familiarity in the curve of her cheek, the softness of her brow, the way her hand curled involuntarily, as if reaching for someone she had lost long ago. "Mama!" Lila whispered, running to her side and touching her arm with trembling fingers. The woman stirred faintly, eyes fluttering open in slow, heavy motions. When she focused enough to see her daughter, her lips curved in a fragile smile, relief flooding her features. But when her gaze shifted behind the small child and landed on Elias, she froze. He felt the air thicken, felt time stretch and echo. Her eyes, those eyes, met his, and recognition struck him with a force so soft yet devastating that he forgot how to breathe. Mira Hale. The girl he had once loved with the earnestness of youth, the woman he had searched for in the silence of regret, now lay before him bruised by life's cruel turns, and wrapped in a blanket too thin for the weight she had carried. Elias stepped forward slowly, as if afraid the moment would disappear if he moved too fast. Myra's breath caught, a flicker of disbelief passing through her expression before sorrow replaced it. She tried to sit up, but exhaustion pressed her back down. "Elias," she whispered, voice trembling and raw. He stood at the foot of her bed, every emotion he had locked away rising like an old tide returning without warning. Lila looked between them, sensing a history she could not name but feeling its depth in the silence that followed. The room seemed to shrink around them, walls breathing, shadows listening. Elias's throat tightened. This was the woman he had imagined safe somewhere, loved somewhere, whole somewhere, not here, fragile and fighting for breath. And as her eyes fluttered again, weak but searching, he realized the truth that would reshape everything. His search had never been for a stranger's mother. It had led him back to the one person he had never stopped needing to find. Elias stood still, the faint hum of the shelter's fluorescent light flickering like an unsteady heartbeat between them. Mira lay propped against a thin pillow, her breathing shallow but steadying now that Lila clung to her side. The child's tiny fingers curled protectively around her mother's arm, as if she feared the world might try to pull them apart again. Elias approached slowly, not wanting to break the fragile calm settling over the room, yet unable to stay at a distance after seeing the truth of what life had done to her. Mira watched him with eyes that carried years of unspoken stories. Her once bright gaze had dimmed into something quieter, older, as though she had learned the world through sorrow instead of promise. He knelt beside the cot, his movements careful, reverent, as if the space around her were sacred. For a long time neither spoke. The silence served as a bridge and a boundary both, stretching across the years that had separated them. "You shouldn't have found me like this," she finally murmured, her voice thin but sincere. "I didn't want anyone to see me this way. Least of all you." Elias shook his head, unable to hide the ache tightening his throat. "I didn't find you by accident, Mira. Your daughter found me." His gaze drifted to Lila, who looked up at him with solemn trust before leaning her head against her mother's shoulder. "She's been alone for 3 days. She was trying to save you." A tremor passed through Mira, visible even beneath the blanket. She stroked Lila's hair, her fingers lingering with tender guilt. "She's braver than I ever was," she whispered. Elias didn't contradict her, though everything in him disagreed. Instead, he asked softly, "What happened?" The question seemed to settle heavily over the room. Myra's breath wavered. She looked away, eyes fixed on the small window, whose cracked glass let in thin strands of fading afternoon light. "Life happened," she said at last. "Not the way we dreamed it would." She told him quietly, her voice never rising, her tone never begging for pity. She spoke as one who accepted truth simply because she no longer had the strength to fight it. After losing touch with him all those years ago, she had been pushed into a marriage meant to secure family ties rather than happiness. At first she tried to believe she could shape peace out of duty, but cruelty seeped into every corner of that house. Her husband died in an accident before Lila was born, leaving Mira alone with in-laws who blamed her for everything that went wrong. And when the abuse became unbearable, she fled, choosing a life of uncertainty rather than a home that treated her like a burden. As Mira spoke, Elias felt the weight of every moment he hadn't been there for her, every letter that never reached him, every missed chance that might have spared her this suffering. But he did not speak those regrets aloud. She needed to be heard, not drowned in apologies he could never fully repay. "You survived all of it," he said quietly. "And you protected her." His gaze softened as he looked at Lila. "That's more strength than you've ever given yourself credit for." Myra's eyes glistened, not with dramatic tears, but with the subtle shimmer of a heart acknowledging kindness it no longer expected. "I didn't survive," she corrected gently. "I endured. There's a difference." Elias reached for her hand, stopping just short of touching. "Then let me help you survive now." The air shifted. Not dramatically, but with the quiet gravity of an old truth resurfacing. Mira looked at him, searching for something she wasn't sure she had the right to hope for. Her voice trembled with caution. "Why would you? After so long?" "Because I never stopped caring," he answered simply. "Even when I thought you'd moved on. Even when I convinced myself it was better not to wonder." Her breath hitched, the room filling with the ghost of the life they once imagined. She wanted to believe him. He saw that yearning flicker across her face, but the years had carved fear into her bones. "I don't want to be someone you save," she whispered. "I don't want you to feel obligated." "I don't feel obligated," he replied, his tone soft as dusk. "I feel responsible for the person I once promised I'd never abandon." Mira closed her eyes, a tear slipping free and trailing silently down her cheek. Lila noticed and wiped it with her sleeve, her small voice soothing. "Mama, he's kind. He helped me. He didn't leave." The simplicity of the statement pierced deeper than anything Elias could have said. A nurse entered then, checking Myra's vitals with clinical efficiency. She informed Elias that Mira could be discharged from the shelter soon, but she would need rest, stability, and a safe environment to regain her strength. With no home, no support and fragile health, her recovery would be slow. When the nurse left, Elias turned back to Mira. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Both of you. At least until you're stronger. My home has space. It's warm. Safe." Mira hesitated, fear and longing warring silently across her expression. "Elias, your world is not mine. I don't belong in it." "You do," he replied without hesitation. "You always did." She looked away again, her hand tightening protectively around Lila's. "I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to break anything in your life." "You won't," he said. "If anything, you'll fix what's been broken for years." Her eyes softened, conflict flickering in their depths. She could feel the sincerity in his voice, the steadiness of his presence, the warmth growing slowly between them like dawn pushing through cold. But scars had taught her to mistrust good things, especially the ones she once lost. "We can't stay long," she murmured, giving the smallest fragile nod. "Just until I'm well." He accepted her terms with a quiet smile, knowing time would unravel the rest. As he gathered her belongings and lifted Lila into his arms, Mira watched him with an expression he couldn't decipher, something between gratitude and fear, hope and hesitation. And as they stepped out of the shelter, the last of the daylight fading behind them, Mira felt an old ache stir inside her, an ache tied not to pain but to memory. She wondered, with trembling uncertainty, whether stepping into Elias Rowan's world again would heal her heart, or break it one final time. Elias drove them home through streets washed clean by the late evening rain, the city lights softening into amber halos against the darkening sky. The world outside the windows moved quietly, as though it sensed the exhaustion resting on Myra's shoulders and the fragile hope curled against her chest. In the back seat, Lila slept deeply, her small hand still holding the edge of Elias's coat like a tether to safety. Mira watched her daughter, tenderness and fear mingling across her face, while Elias kept stealing glances at the rearview mirror, as if reassuring himself that both of them were truly there, and not a memory he dreamed into being. His house waited at the end of a quiet street, a place designed for order rather than warmth. Soft lights illuminated the entryway as he helped Mira down from the car, her slow steps betraying weakness despite her attempts to hide it. The air inside carried a calm hush, broken only by the small sigh she released when she crossed the threshold. A sound that made something inside Elias settle, as though the house had been waiting for her without knowing it. He guided her to the guest room, adjusting the pillows with careful precision, then returned to lift Lila gently from the car. She clung to him instinctively, even in sleep, her cheek pressing against his shoulder, as if she had found her harbor after days adrift. When he laid her beside Mira, the child's hand immediately reached for her mother's, a gesture so instinctive it tightened Myra's throat. Elias watched quietly, sensing the sacredness of their closeness, yet unable to hide the protectiveness rising in him like a tide. "I don't know how to thank you," Mira whispered, brushing hair from Lila's forehead with trembling fingers. "You've already done too much." Elias shook his head. "I've barely done anything. Rest first. Everything else can wait." But rest was only a word. Myra's eyes remained open long after the room fell dark. She listened to the faint sounds of the house, the hum of air vents, the soft creak of settling wood, the distant rhythm of Elias moving quietly in his study. This was safety she hadn't known in years, yet safety itself felt unfamiliar, almost frightening. She feared relying on something that could one day be taken away again. By morning, the house felt different. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, warming the polished floors. Lila awoke first, wandering into the kitchen where Elias stood clumsily attempting to prepare breakfast. She giggled when he dropped a spoon, and the sound carried through the house like a bell, bright and new. When Mira appeared in the doorway, leaning slightly on the frame, Elias turned instinctively, his expression softening at the sight of her. "You should be lying down," he said gently. "I'm stronger today," she replied, though her voice still carried fatigue. He stepped toward her, stopping only when he sensed her breath catch. "You're allowed to lean on someone else, Mira." Her eyes flickered, wounded memory surfacing for just a moment before she pushed it back down. "I'm not used to it." "I know," he murmured. "But we'll figure it out. Slowly." The morning unfolded in small, gentle gestures. Elias poured Mira tea, and held the cup steady while she lifted it. Lila insisted on sitting in his lap while eating fruit, sticky fingers leaving smudges on his shirt he didn't bother wiping away. Mira watched him with conflicting emotions, gratitude, disbelief, fear of needing him more than she should. He had always been steady, but now he was something else too, safe. As the days passed, the rhythm between them grew more natural. Mira helped in small ways, folding laundry, brushing Lila's hair, while Elias adjusted his work schedule to be home more often. They spoke of ordinary things, herbal remedies, gentle routines for Lila, the way rain sounded on the roof. But beneath each quiet conversation lingered something unspoken, something shaped by shared history and newfound tenderness. One evening, as dusk deepened into violet, Mira stepped into the living room to find Elias standing by the window, the same kind of window through which Lila had first found him. Warm light washed over his face, softening the sharpness he usually carried. The moment she saw him there, framed in amber glow, memory and present collided within her. "This window feels different from the one at the cafe," she said softly. Elias turned, a faint smile touching his lips. "Because I'm not sitting alone in front of it anymore." She hesitated, stepping closer with a vulnerability she rarely showed. "I keep wondering if I'm taking something from you. If my being here complicates your life." He shook his head slowly. "You're giving something back that I thought I'd lost forever." Her breath trembled. "What?" "Meaning," he said simply. "And the chance to make things right, not for the past but for now." She looked away, eyes glistening. "I don't want you to regret letting us in." "I won't," he replied, and there was no hesitation in him. "But I think you're afraid that I will." Mira closed her eyes, swallowing a rising ache. "I'm afraid of needing someone who might walk away." "I didn't walk away," he said gently. "Life pulled us apart. And now, it brought you back." Silence bloomed, delicate and heavy. Lila, asleep in the next room, seemed to anchor the moment with her steady breathing. Mira opened her eyes, searching Elias's face for any sign of pity, but she found only sincerity, the same sincerity she had once trusted without question. "Elias," she whispered. I don't know how to start again. We don't have to start again, he said. We just begin from here. Before she could answer, his phone buzzed with a message, a reminder of a meeting scheduled to decide a new company expansion. Mira stepped back immediately, something in her expression closing off, as though reality had just returned to reclaim what wasn't hers. You should go, she said quickly. You have responsibilities. You've already done enough. He knew the fear behind her retreat, knew it wasn't rejection but self-preservation. But before he could reassure her, she turned toward the hallway, toward Lila, toward distance, toward whatever felt safest. Mira, he called softly. She paused, only for a breath. When I come back, he said, voice low, steady, full of quiet conviction. I hope you'll still be here. Her hand tightened on the doorway, and for a moment he thought she might answer. But instead she whispered, barely audible, I hope I will too. And as Elias stepped out into the cooling night, a realization settled over him with the force of a promise. The next choice he made wouldn't just shape his future. It would determine whether the warmth slowly growing in this home would take root, or vanish like the rain that once separated them.